Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors, episode 84.
Welcome to Life by Design, the podcast for chiropractors. Here's your host, Dr. Jamie Richards.
Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards, and today I bring on Mike Gibson. We're talking about team. Recently, in my own personal experience, having changed over 6 or 7 members of our team in the last 6 months, I get to share with you what that was like, what the challenges were, why we did that, and really what we learned along the way. And I think you're going to get a lot out of today's episode as usual. Of course, check to the end of the show notes. Both Mike and I have opportunities in our practices to come and train with us for a short or long period of time and get immersed in the retention-based practice approach. And thank you for listening to Life by Design for Chiropractors. Mike, welcome back to Life by Design for Chiropractors.
Thanks, Jamie. Always great to be here. Looking forward to what I know is going to be another valuable episode.
Yeah, it's, oftentimes on the show, we've got a topic that we're going to discuss that we know is going to be valuable for those listening in. And we often have a series of points we want to get across. And we have some of that today, but really today is about sharing some of the stories and experiences specifically from the last 6 months in my personal practice. And I know you've had a lot of these experiences yourself, which led to a lot of the systems and procedures that you use around team, which is why I specifically wanted to bring you on the podcast to have this conversation with you. So before I get into my own personal experience, you've worked with teams, you've hired teams, you've trained teams, and it's been a big central focus. Let's talk a bit about first, just your thoughts on, some of these might be things that people recognize, and there's obvious ones. So maybe let me frame it a different way. What would you say are the 1 or 2, less obvious benefits and, important components of having a great team?
Ooh, good question. I think, the first thing that came to mind when you asked that was, I remember it vividly. I remember sitting at the dock at my cottage this is probably maybe 6, 7, 8 years into practice, maybe.
Okay. And
for the first time ever being away at the cottage and not having to think about what was going on in my practice at my business. Right. Were things going to be okay there? I didn't have to think about it. That was the first time. So it was 8 years of every day was a work day, always having to think about what's going on, worrying, concerned, is everything still happening right. when I'm not there? So I think one of the biggest things a great team can do for us is gives us peace of mind to be away from your business, whether that's away on a holiday or even just at home with your family, and not have to worry about what's going on there, that things are going to continue to roll just as if you were there.
Right.
And I think that's probably one of the most, or something that I don't hear talked about a lot, but just the peace of mind to know that everything's being taken care of when you're not there.
Yeah, no, I can completely appreciate that. I think it took me a lot longer than 8 years to get to that point. Well, let's be honest, I didn't have a team probably for the first 9 years. Mine were students at university. So, they were great, and many of them are now chiropractors probably listening to this show. So I don't want to say they weren't a good team and a fun team to have around, but I had lots of worrying that went on. Thankfully, I lived in my practice for a lot of the practice life cycle, but I completely get that. I completely get what it was like to be at home and wondering, am I going to get a call? Do I need to go back? Am I going to get a text message? Maybe I should be there working on this, that, or the other thing. And part of that is my own issues with, being controlling and wanting to oversee everything. And then the flip side is knowing that you can hire a great team. And, anytime I've had a great team, I've had those feelings and emotions. And of course, the flip side, and some of which we'll talk about today, when you've had challenges with a team for, whatever the reason is, you can feel all those emotions creeping back in. I think, having said that, Mike, one of the ways you could probably audit yourself is using your feelings as a potential barometer for if you have a good team or not, right? If you're 6 months into your team and you're always worried, you can't let go at work, you're afraid that when you show up Monday morning that, something's not going to get done. If not 10 things aren't going to get done, you're going to be dealing with the same problems over and over again. Maybe there's a problem with the team.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I think just as an aside, but I think that's just a really, really good exercise. I was talking with the doc yesterday in our coaching call, and we were talking about self-esteem, and we were talking about just getting more in touch with the emotions and the feelings that we were having in different situations with practice members, specifically around the topic of holding back and not saying what we want to say for fear of rejection or for fear of what they may think of us. And so anyway, that was my suggestion, interestingly enough, was just, anytime that you have that feeling after that interaction, just stop and really just think, okay, how did I feel? What emotion am I feeling? And why? And is it based in reality, or is something that I've manufactured? And I think your point, I hadn't thought about it in that context, but I think it's a great one for so many facets of just life, not just business, but just to kind of get an idea of what are we feeling, and not in the sense that, of course, if you know us and our Think by Design program, the last thing that we're going to do is to follow and act based on your emotions. But emotions can be, it doesn't mean they're not very, very useful, very powerful, very important. And recognizing what our emotions are, because simply put, it's going to be a reflection of our values, and how our values were affected in any given situation. So I think that's great advice, and just starting to think about, how do I feel when I'm away from practice? Do I feel trust in that things are going to get done? How do I feel when I'm with them? Am I constantly feeling like I'm having to, almost eavesdrop on conversations to see, okay, what are they really doing in the other room? Are they doing it the way, that they should be, that they've been trained? How about the phone calls? How much trust and how long is that leash? Which I think we should chat about that at some point today as well. But just, how do you feel? What emotions are elicited based on their behavior, their performance, both when you're around and when you're not around?
Yeah, I think all very good advice, and it lends itself to the conversation today, which is really sharing a personal story for me about, being in practice and being in practice since 2003. I had to think about that for a minute. So being in practice since 2003 and having teams and hiring, I've had an experience of what it's like to have a great team, what it's like to have a more challenging team, and just, the nature of what we've developed here at the Life by Design Center has really required a lot of scaling. And that was always the idea. And I good and bad character traits for me is, part of me is a little naive, as you know, and sometimes that is good because it doesn't get in the way of stopping me from going after things that might be, if I probably really fully understood the depth of it, I might actually stop myself like any normal person. And so I don't. And then we get into a situation where, in this case, scaling really fast. I think right now we have about 17 staff at the center, between coaches and baristas and managers and the office staff and doctors. And so, that's a pretty good size operation for a small business. And 16 people other than me is a lot of management. It's a lot of overseeing people. And, the bigger you get without enough systems in place and, ability to audit what's happening and really control the product and control the experience, something's going to get out of line and there's going to be issues. And that's what's happened over the last 6 months, is lots of great things. But in that process, we ended up basically changing over about 6 to 7 of our team members in the last 6 months. And that's, you can imagine changing just a couple team members over the course of 6 months, let alone 6 to 7, and what that entails. So I want to share some of those experiences and talk about some of the lessons that I acquired through that. And before I do, Mike, what's your experience been in your practice? Have you ever hit a situation where you had to let, or multiple people let themselves go at the same time? And what was that like? And what was the I guess the number one take home point in terms of adapting to that and getting things back on track?
Yeah, good question. I don't recall off the top of my head ever having multiple people leave at the same time. I think in my experience, every time that a practice member either left or we let them go, it was always something that it's never been unexpected. And I think that'll be different. And I'm looking forward to you sharing your story, because I think there was there were some things that were unexpected for you, which I think there's always some greater lessons there. But for me, I can't remember any times that, it was an unexpected departure. It's always been something that was, either planned by me or we knew it was coming and we had it literally planned for it and was just kind of you're going to let it run its course for a number of different reasons and different situations. Or something that was even discussed, right? It's like, hey, this isn't working out for us. What do you think? And let's, and then there was a time period where we were both kind of seeing whether or not we were going to continue on with the relationship. So I'll say this is that I feel like I've been prepared for when everyone has left. Doesn't mean that it was easy. Doesn't mean it wasn't a pain in the butt to try and find someone new. It doesn't mean we didn't go through some challenges in the interim or from switching from one staff member over to another. It definitely doesn't mean that every staff member left happy. So, I think we've been there, but I can't say there's ever been a time where it wasn't something that in at least some degree it was planned. And there was a plan and a strategy in place to move on to the next step and make the best of a situation that's always going to be a challenge no matter what.
Well, in our personal example, so if we dive into that, having someone the last few years, and what I'll say about our staff in that instance, we let them go. This was maybe 6 months ago. But what I'll say is, for most people on the surface level, and probably even beyond that, this staff member was great. Really from a productivity side of things, they were fantastic. From a skill set side of things, probably the most productive staff member that I'd ever had. And so you would think, well, what's the problem? Why would this ever be an issue? And it just, it just came to a point where we recognized that the values were not necessarily aligned with our values. And it wasn't necessarily in a not a negative way, but it wasn't as if they were in such opposition that they were trying to, crush us in any way. It wasn't a conscious thing like that. It was so unconscious, I think, that the value system was so different. And for us, one of the situations that came up, there was an event going on. Here at the Life by Design Center, we've got Extraordinary Life Chiropractic, we've got Charlie's Cafe, we've got the Fit Club. And so, we've got a lot of aspects of that health blueprint in place. And, part of the role of the staff member was to set us up in a different event. And at this event, they were looking for a training facility to come in and do exclusive, fitness instruction for this day event. And it came up in one of our meetings, essentially, that a different gym had been booked by our actual staff member who was on the committee for this event. And, just the look on my face, I was so perplexed because obviously we have our own training facility, which is part of the facility that is really writing the checks for our team. And that was my question. It was, what about ours? And, I don't know if it was a conscious or unconscious thing, but literally the blank stare coming back at me told me that it probably wasn't even something that was even considered. It wasn't really a decision of, well, this one versus that. It was not even thought about. And so that really made me start to question whether our value systems were, to the same degree aligned. And definitely when I look back now and I look at what we've been able to hire over the last, month and the people we have on our team now, the importance of that. And really, I think the importance here and the lesson, and this is something I'll let you talk a bit about because it's something that's core to Life by Design. But the lesson here is, as hard as it is, it's really values over opportunities. And, again, productivity wise, this person was great. And in my mind, thinking about, terminating the position, and I did consult with you before we did this and had a conversation and kind of went through those steps, get a little pep talk from you. And, you just realize that as much as this is going to be painful in the moment and difficult in the moment, that it's always going to be better off, simply because there's no way that it's sustainable in a successful way if the values are not met and it's simply just something out of convenience.
For sure. And I find it's getting harder and harder. I know Rochelle's going to send us a message and tell us that we sound like old fogies talking about back in the day when kids had to work harder, these millennials. But I really honestly think it's become harder and harder when I look over the last 15 years of hiring people.
Mm-hmm.
I just find that the high quality people are fewer and further between. But I think there's some important bits of information that we need to fill in there in that conversation. So let's just start with this thought and this suggestion is that we should always, this is our advice, hire for people. Hire the best people that you can find. Not, in the past, I know, especially when I was growing up, is like, do you have an education? Do you have these skill sets?
Mm-hmm.
If you do, you have the job. They couldn't have cared less about who you were as a person, your work ethic, your characteristics, your values. I mean, those are things that were never discussed before. And yet I'm going to be the first one to advise you now that those are the most important things that you need to look for when it comes to hiring team members. And in fact, many people have read our ad, and as I always joke, it's the most stolen ad, CA ad in the history of chiropractic. That's for sure.
It's true. It's true.
The amount of times I've seen other people use that ad that I wrote way back when, which is great, as long as it's helped people get good team members, that's excellent. But what people maybe don't recognize and maybe regret it after the fact is that we get a lot of flack for that ad. We get a lot of people like, this ad like totally turned me off. And I'm like, right, like in respect, great. That was the point, because if you don't share said values, you will find that ad somewhat offensive. And that's exactly what we wanted to do. And so what we did in doing it in our whole hiring process was to essentially create a whole bunch of opportunities for people to go, this doesn't feel right. And that's exactly what we want to try to do, so that we could find people that, share the value, share the work ethic, the characteristics that we want. Now, having said that, I think there's another really, really important lesson, and one that I've learned along the way. And I think you have as well. I'll let you respond to that on your own, but it's that I think me, and I think you, at least Jamie, in my opinion, is that we can be unrealistic about our expectations for people in a CA role, especially, right? In a CA role where, it's not the highest paying job. It's not, it is what it is as far as employment goes. And so I think a lot of times, especially because of the position, and the type of people that usually fill those positions and their work experience, but also too, especially when it comes to Life by Design docs, and I would say go so far as say chiropractors in general, is that generally speaking, we as chiropractors think about philosophy way more than the average person. Most people have never given philosophy much thought, let alone have one, or any conscious one, or have in any way identified what is a value for them. So even if someone does pay lip service to sharing a value or sharing a philosophy, the extent or degree to which that is conscious is nowhere near what it typically is for chiropractors, just because of the nature, especially as a third paradigm. Like, we have a pretty philosophically driven, and I use that word philosophically loosely, but driven profession. So I think that's just, we're unrealistic about how much thought people actually put into that. So that becomes also a challenge in terms of matching values and matching characteristics.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. That's why I had a chuckle when you said it. And, these are conversations that Dana and I often have. At the same time, I do my best to make sure my expectations are in check and give them some conscious thought. And I still have a hard time bringing the expectation level probably into something that's realistic. And I don't know if that's ever going to happen. And that's me. And so I've kind of gone the other direction in our group orientation. When we're doing the hiring, I actually say to people, these are my expectations. You might find them difficult. And if you don't think you can meet them, then don't move on to the next stage. And you talked about the ad being a disqualifier on purpose. The group orientation for us is often a disqualifier on the purpose. We're painting our picture and our vision and going through a lot of those values. And the flip side of that is the ad and the group orientation are also attractors. They're meant to be polarizing. And that's what your ad is. It's polarizing. It's meant for people to say, oh, I'm not interested. But just like you, how many people actually come in and when you ask them, what was it that inspired them to apply for this role? I would say, at least 50% of the time they say it was the ad.
For sure it is, yeah. And that's the point, right? Is to attract those like people. And one thing that came to mind when you were talking there was the old adage of you get what you pay for as well. And I think that's something that if we have these higher expectations, I think that we also have to be prepared to pay people accordingly. And I think that's something that just as a group, when I look at some of the expectations that I've had in the past, and then I look at what I pay people, I'm like, it doesn't really match up, as compared to what they could be earning elsewhere in a similar type role. And so I think that that's been very eye-opening. It's either you have one of two choices: lower the expectations in terms of them just being, I'll use the term receptionist and have that simple role and then pay what we've traditionally paid, or hey, listen, I want someone who's going to be more than that, who's going to push the envelope, who's going to push the business, who's going to help us grow, who's going to be engaged, and I'm willing to pay for that. I think that's a decision that we all have to make.
Yeah, I think it is. And when you actually do the metrics on this, and when you actually look at the data, and you really start crunching the numbers, we've talked about this many times, but the profit margins inside a good chiropractic practice should be really, really high. And because of that, I think that in most cases, you can pay your team leader or your CA a lot more than you think you can, right? And if you ask yourself, okay, I'm taking in this income, and for me to give this team leader, let's say a $2 or $3 raise, even, something extreme like that, from what they're getting now is the difference of, $80 or $120 a week. It's $500 a month. It's $6,000 a year. So then just ask yourself, for $6,000 out of what I'm making, would I give $6,000 to not have to train somebody, to not have to worry about the practice running itself, to not have all the things that you talked about in the opening about the challenges? Would that be worth it to you? And I think we're often in our practice, this is just a general practice thing that I see across chiropractors, is we're nickel and diming every single area to scrounge every little piece of it. And really we're just costing ourselves when really, if we were to think more in terms of an investment mindset, and I know you have associates, I have associates, hiring staff, marketing, all these things, you look at them as an investment, then, you're going to approach them very differently. And I think you're going to be able to keep these staff long-term, in addition to providing them with a great workplace environment, getting them attached to your vision and excited. And that really is the other piece of it. We talked in the pre-show, I think what happened with the staff and then the intermediate staff, which we hired prior to this staff, for me, with the scaling of the practice and the speed at which with everything was growing and the center was growing, I think I was really trying to create a tiering system where I was at the top. And then I had, other doctors below me who were in charge of, say, managing, and really trying to get the team to direct themselves in that sense. So I wasn't involved in every single step and decision. And, looking back and what we've done for our theme this year in 2019, we're calling it the year of the team at the Life by Design Center as our theme, really realizing that part of my role as the CEO, especially in a business the size of, 10 to 15 employees, I have to be far more involved in that team training, in the team hiring, in the team onboarding, in the regular meetings, and really keeping people connected to the vision, because it is your vision. And no matter how good of people you get who have similar values, who are connected to that, they're never going to be you. And so that was a big lesson for me, Mike, in this process with the last few team members is, you can only do that for a bit before it starts to seep into the results and the experience. You set the stage with your onboarding, your agreements, and all the different things that we do in the process. But if you're not holding people accountable, just like a patient or a practice member, then like anybody, that's going to fall by the wayside, and you're going to start to see that seep itself in.
For sure. And I think one of the things I've learned over the years, and I think this is part of what you were getting at, is that we have to be willing also. to look ourselves in the mirror and look and see, have I done what I needed to do?
Yes.
Did I do everything I need to do as a leader, as the CEO, right? Whatever you call yourself. Have I done everything to set the stage for success for this staff member? And I know for myself early on, I remember one staff member in particular that I actually had, I think for the first 4 years of my business, when, it was kind of one of those moments where I'm like, this isn't going to work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, I think most of the blame goes to me, because I did, and I was just young and starting, and I didn't know any better. But still, as I reflect, I think it's even more true now. Is I didn't do the things I needed to do to support this person. And actually, I have a call right after this recording with another coaching client, and that's our discussion for today. It's all about team, and specifically, they're bringing on a new team member. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the things, and Jamie, maybe you can kind of talk about. There's 3 things here. There's 3 areas that I want to bring up to him today. Say, hey, these are the 3 areas you need to address and make sure that you're doing a good job right from day one. And maybe I'll share them now. And maybe I'd love to hear from you. Which one of these 3 do you think you need to improve upon the most as far as the system and the way that you do things, so that these new team members, that they have, great success for a long period of time. So here they are. Number 1, it's just like practice members, is coming to an agreement. And you stated a minute ago that you've done a much better job at this in the like in the hiring process. Like, here are my expectations. Here are your responsibilities. This is when you will get a raise. This is when you will not get a raise. This is when you can take a vacation. This is. All the expectations are set out just as if it was a practice member. We've talked at length about how important that is, and getting a firm agreement. One of the things that we always do is we have a policy manual. I think it's probably 15 to 20 pages. And actually, when I bring people in, the very last step of the hiring process, they come in and I essentially lay it all on the table and I say, listen, I'm offering you the job, but you're not allowed to say yes right now. You need to take this policy manual home, okay? And they also take our procedure manual, but I need you to read the policy manual, twice. And I need you to agree that you agree to these standards,
right?
That you are willing to follow all of these procedures and all of these rules. Please also skim the procedure manual, and this is what you're going to be responsible for, right? You can't do that now. Go home tomorrow, come back, bring it back. If you want the job, please sign it. And so it's an agreement. It's an agreement that requires a signature. It's an agreement that requires some thought. It's not just, I'm really excited, I'll sign anything right now. It's go home and think about this, okay? So anyway, number 1 is getting a clear agreement, setting expectations, and making sure everyone's on the same page. Number 2, and this was the big thing that I didn't do with my original staff member I was just mentioning, is I didn't really give them any training at all, right? It's kind of like, you figure it out. And so having an onboarding system, having, like I was just, again, preparing for this call, is that there's a 6-month onboarding program. So when we hire someone new, we've got a plan for the first 6 months at all the things that we're going to do to make sure that they have all of the resources, and through that process gain all of the knowledge they need to be really great at their job, right? So there's no excuses. Oh, you didn't show me how to do this, or I'm not sure. We're going to show you everything. Okay. And then the last one you just mentioned, which is super important, is just the accountability. Right. The accountability to meeting the standards, meeting the expectations, to, having even something as little as, here's the communication strategy for this visit, go. There's a standard for that. And if you're not doing it well enough, there's got to be you got to be willing to say, hey, listen, that's not good enough. And let's work on it together. I'm here for you. Let's work through this together. And just about being on time, or dress code, or, anything, everything, right? It's just keeping them accountable, because too many times I think, and this is part of a small business, is that we oftentimes have felt hostage held hostage by our CAs because we think, okay, if they're not here, we can't open our doors tomorrow. So there's that fear there, and which I understand, but I think there's lots of ways to build that relationship, and it starts with the agreement, it starts with the training, and just having that person that you hire that is the right person, that shares those values, that you can hold them accountable without fear of them leaving, and instead enjoying the feedback because they want to get better, right? And they appreciate the honesty, and they appreciate that you're willing to help them get better. But that again all starts with hiring that person who is the best person for the job. So those are the three. So I'm interested from you, Jamie, and when it comes to agreement, training, and then accountability. If you had to pick one, which one do you think you have to improve, or have you already improved, so that you make sure that the outcome for your new team members is going to be different than some of the challenges and headaches you've had over the last several months?
Yeah, I think that all three of them obviously are important. Difficult picking just one. And I think that to answer your second question, I think that just with this new team that we have right now, we have improved all three of those aspects. So I'm happy to say that. I'm excited about what we've put together. There's still some work to be done, but if I had to pick one that could be done better, it's probably the onboarding system. Again, it's my nature to throw people into the fire and let them figure it out as we go. And part of that is just, the challenge in keeping up with all the different moving parts here at the Life by Design Center. So we've done a much better job with the onboarding system, with making sure that people understand step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. We have some upsides in terms of we have extra help. There's extra hands on deck with associate doctors and so on. It's a little more difficult if you're flying solo. So part of my job right now that we're working on with the onboarding is getting it done and updated and up to date. So, if it's not always me and all hands are on deck, then it's something, as you said, I can just give them the manual. We can set up our training times, we can go. But all three of those are really important. Obviously the more clarity in the agreements you have, the better. The onboarding system, which we talked about. And I think the missing link, the one that might make the biggest difference once it's implemented, is the accountability. Because I do think, when you get to have staff for an extended time, it's not necessarily that you become friends with them, but what happens is you become familiar with them. And that familiarity makes it more difficult to say things that, maybe aren't being done correctly. And of course, if you're a nice person, it's just not something you think about. And then the other side of that is not just being a nice person, but again, going back to the expectations, my expectations on people is just that they'll do their job. And so I just expect that the job's getting done. So one thing we're implementing is an accountability system, not just with team trainings and employee reviews, but also whether it be monthly or quarterly, where I'm going to actually pull 10 files and look at those files. Are they complete? Are they up to date? Is everything checked off on the checklist? And that's going to be the accountability system to make sure that, at least from a procedural standpoint, those pieces are getting put in place. So lots of lessons to have learned over the last 6 months, Mike, but I'm happy to say, and we're doing the podcast now because we're in a better place. We've essentially stabilized where we're at. We've got a great team in place now of excited, good people who are ready to go and who are involved in a training process. As soon as I jump off this call, we're team training right now. So, and I'm excited to do it. I think in the past, I just wanted to get it done and get them doing whatever, but I've realized that every moment, it's like in marketing, right? Every moment you invest in that, in strategy and training is, a 10, 20, 100% return on an investment down the road. So it's just values over opportunities, not trading off the long-term for short-term pleasure, dealing with what you have to in front of you, facing your challenges, overcoming them, as they say, eating the elephant, and then carrying on. So any last words about team, Mike, that you'd like to throw into the mix?
No, I'm just excited to see. Obviously, I've had a front row seat to the last 6 months in your office, and I know there's been some headaches. Might be an understatement at certain times, but I'm just excited to see. I know you've worked very, very hard to improve some of the things that we've talked about today. So I'm really eager to see how it's going to play out differently. And based on everything that I know you've been doing, I'm certain that it will. So hopefully everyone listening is just is really going to reflect on this and have just an honest assessment. Because I think a lot of times, it's like I mentioned, it was for me, it's us that really needs to improve in those three areas. And it's, we oftentimes just, blame and complain about our staff. But I think most times it starts with us. And if we were to do some of the things I think that we shared today, I know that what can for many docs be their biggest stressor about practice.
Right.
These are things that can really help and reduce the stress and allow you to be at the cottage, at the lake, sitting on the dock, thinking about anything but being at practice.
You got it. Well, who would have thought that taking self-responsibility in any area of your life would have such a dramatic effect? Huh. Guys, thank you for listening to Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic.